So it's all for play for still.
I think so. Do you want to bet against us?
Everybody bet against them, but still the fact was Aston Villa, champions of Europe, has a nice ring to it, and the year this goes out is the first possibility that it might be said again. 43 years after the first time, this is how Aston Villa won the European Cup in 1982. Ron Saunders once told Shoot magazine that the sign of success in football is to have too many fixtures. Well, in the spring of '77, they must have been the best team on the planet after it took them 10.5 hours to win 2 ties of football in capturing the League Cup. Despite that success, the Aston Villa manager believed that the club was still 2 or 3 years away from becoming a top side. So he got to work again. The highest profile departure was Ray Graydon, whose top-level career was admittedly on its last legs due to injury. Whilst he went to Coventry, centre-half Leighton Phillips was coveted by Southampton. Whilst he wouldn't be too long for Villa Park, he'd last a further 12 months before signing for Swansea. Coming into the club, Saunders built the side from the bottom up. Nigel Spink from Chelmsford cost just £6,000, and Jimmy Rimmer was now not required by Arsenal. Those were the goalkeepers sorted. In the centre of defence, Everton's Ken McNaught had sufficiently impressed in the Marathon League Cup final, and he would be another man set to stabilise the backline. Elsewhere, utility man John Gregory came in from Northampton Town, and Dunfermline's Alan Evans completed the summer business. That and the season had just gone prompted bookmakers to slash their odds from 100 to 1 from the prior season to just 6 to 1 for Villa to win the league this time round. Whilst the pre-season tournament saw defeats to strong outfits in Athletic Club and Anderlecht, it was a useful experience for a team on the up. The question was, were Villa ready?
A good little centre, and that's a goal! A wonderful goal!
Oh, and a free header! And a free kick! On the goal!
Now that might not suggest so. And even in their first home league win of the season, a 1-0 triumph over Arsenal, Ron Saunders labelled it as the club's worst performance for 2 years. But once the rhythm of the UEFA Cup turned up and Villa edged out teams like Fenerbahce and Gornik Zabrze, they returned to their pomp.
Gidman too there. Carragher was it, yes! Oh, and great!
The second followed a John Gidman free kick, headed in by John Dean for a 2-goal lead to take to the second leg.
The first win ended reigning champions of Europe, Liverpool's run of 38 games unbeaten at Anfield. The second set Villa on a path to potential European glory themselves. A 3-1 aggregate triumph over Athletic Club ensured they'd be in the conversation come the spring, where Johan Cruyff's Barcelona would meet them. In the meantime, Villa had to go through heartache. Off the pitch, they effectively had to bid goodbye to club stalwarts Alex Cropley and John Robson, the former thanks to a horrific broken leg, the latter diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. On the pitch, both cups were quickly surrendered. Nottingham Forest began their own time with the League Cup trophy, dispatching of Villa from a December quarter-final. Then in January, Everton got some cup revenge in the third round of the FA Cup at Goodison Park. Combined with league wobbles, Villa prepared to enter March and the test of Barcelona with a position of 10th in the league.
Et sur ce coup franc, McDouall réduit la marque d'une magnifique tête plongeante. Aston Villa 1, Barcelone 2. Et un but de Denton, 2-1 pour Barcelone. Cruyff et ses coéquipiers sont qualifiés.
Against a side of such quality, Aston Villa might not have progressed, but they had certainly put a marker down. Sadly, a winning return to form for both Gordon Cowans on the score sheet and the team in the spring came a little too late to engineer a return to the continent. 8th place and just 4 points away from local rivals West Brom, Villa would have an almighty fight to join them, as well as Everton, Manchester City and Arsenal, never mind those who were busy winning the European Cup, Liverpool and soon to be Nottingham Forest. Whichever way you looked, Villa were still motoring forwards. Their ground was injected with money to fund renovations. Saunders was rebuffing all the money in the world to choose Villa over Saudi Arabia, and on the pitch, they weren't bad either. Spurs were slapped 4-1 at White Hart Lane. The FA Cup holders Ipswich Town also fell on their own patch, and most satisfyingly of the lot was this. Progression in the Cups might not have come to fruition with third and fourth round defeats in the FA Cup and League Cup respectively. They couldn't get a game on at Villa Park between Boxing Day and March the 3rd, and players were dropping like flies owing to injury, but still the Villa kept going. Gary Shaw was making inroads into the team, joining new stalwarts in Gordon Cowans and Dennis Mortimer. Teams like Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea and of course the Blues again fell in the league, and they wound up posting an identical 46 points and 8th place. That still wasn't enough to compete in Europe. There was the cold hard reality that Aston Villa's potential was being frittered away. Ron Saunders' stock was decreasing just in time for what was supposed to be a bright new decade at Villa Park. On one hand, the fans were beginning to get what they wanted. Finally, a winger was through the door when Tony Morley was signed. On the other, Villa were hemorrhaging forwards. First, Andy Gray was away to Wolves and Brian Little almost swapped Villa Park for St Andrews, only for a medical to effectively write off his career with a single stroke. He would have one more season with Villa, but cruelly injuries caught up to him. Also leaving was John Gidman for $750,000 to Everton after he stumbled across the wages of his fellow pros at Villa and realised he was being shafted financially. Going the other way was Mike Payich for only £200,000, making him, at only 29, Villa's oldest player. The England international would not last long, himself robbed of the latter part of his career owing to injuries. It was another season of misery.
Daniel helps it on, comes down to Gray. There's the goal. There's the goal for Andy Gray. Oh, little back spin on it, kill it. Oh, that looks useful. Yes, it's John Walker who scored.
Dalglish. Owen Rimmer came. McDermott. Johnson.
Everton dumped them out of the League Cup in October. 2 months later, their neighbours inflicted a typically surgical defeat on Villa too. That was the match a mere 10 games into his Villa career that ended Payich's season and subsequently his time at the club. With Doug Ellis doing his usual hokey-cokey with hierarchical roles at the top of the club, Villa could clutch onto one bright spot and it went by the name of the FA Cup. Bristol Rovers, Cambridge and Blackburn all fell and thankfully second division opposition were handed to Villa in the quarter-final. Second division opposition, but certainly not of the second tier. The Hammers would go on to win the competition, so for the third time in 5 seasons, Villa had been put out by the eventual champions. What had been an uptick in form before the tie nosedived into an eventual 7th place finish with yet another tally of 46 points. Safe to say then that Europe was missed out on once again. There wasn't much indication of what was to come.
Mortimer, Lukic's really committing himself and win, and Shaw makes it!
Mortimer, that's a nice ball.
Gordon Cowans for 1-0 Villa.
Suddenly it didn't matter that Peter Wiv was signed instead of Graham Sharp. It didn't matter that Shoot had called them yesterday's team. It didn't matter that they were an outside shot at 25-1 for the title. They were going for it anyway. It took just 177 seconds for Villa to find the net in the entire season in a 2-1 win at Elland Road, and by match 12, Saunders' own personal landmark, only goal difference was keeping them off the top of the table. The team of the 80s, that's Crystal Palace if you were wondering, were beaten. 3 goals were scored at Old Trafford, the Blues were vanquished once again, and Spurs were hammered. Suddenly, this Villa side looked the real deal. The side keeping them from the top, Bobby Robson's Ipswich Town, the first team to bloody Villa's nose, and the pair would ultimately make up the title picture in 1981. Ipswich finally tasted league defeat on November the 11th away to Brighton. It was an afternoon that gave Villa belief as they trailed Norwich the following day, only to rebound with both points and a 3-1 victory. It should have kick-started a title charge into the Christmas period.
Intelligent bit of refereeing, Sunderland, and that's a beautiful goal for Talbot. 1-1.
Cochrane. It's there. Craig Johnston's got it.
Shaw and Hawker, get his this is, and he's ready to go!
And yet the only festive joy could be found at Villa Park naturally came with the visit of Birmingham City. Villa slapped them by 3 thanks to a David Geddes double and a Gary Shaw third. Despite ending the year with a 2-2 draw at Nottingham Forest, 1980 was the club's most promising since the League Cup had been won 3 years prior. 1 point split the top three, who would be in it for the long haul. Liverpool, who were also motoring towards their third European Cup in 5 seasons, they were the favourites. Ipswich Town in third, they were everyone's second team. And Aston Villa, wedged between them, were just supposed to drop out of the race. Spoiler, of course, they didn't.
Molly again. Oh, he beat Money too easily. Gary Shaw.
Here's Tony Morley. Good running by him. Oh, what a great goal!
Evans going up, giving a touch, but with will. And Peter win.
Today it's a cliche to defend your poor results in the Cup by calling it a blessing in disguise, but as Ipswich eliminated Villa from the third round of the FA Cup, that statement only became truer the more the season wore on. Between now and the end of the campaign, Villa knew their schedule and it was 17 league games. Ipswich had both the UEFA Cup and the FA Cup to contend with and would play 31. Liverpool, with a potential quadruple on the cards, would play 27 more times. What finer way to start that sequence then than a 2-0 triumph over the latter that belatedly took Villa to the top of the table on January the 10th. Of course, it wouldn't last long given Ipswich's games in hand, but the momentum Villa received took them all the way to March 21st with a defeat of Spurs at White Hart Lane. By now, Liverpool had waved goodbye to the title, contented with a crack at the League Cup in a final replay with West Ham and a European Cup semi-final to win. And yet Ipswich remained top, despite reaching the final four of both the UEFA Cup and FA Cup. A point the difference, and Villa simply could not stop winning.
Gibbous. Oh, a good knock on. Morley was onside.
From with May down, and Bremner's in there. And Bremner makes it 2-1.
Coupled with another win at home over local rivals West Brom whilst Ipswich were busy in the UEFA Cup meant that whatever happened 6 days later, Villa would be top. That's because Ipswich, attempting to spin multiple plates simultaneously, had been smashed at Elland Road and at the Hawthorn. With the gap now 3 points ahead of Ipswich and the self-same tractor boys the next visitors to Villa Park, the title could almost be won on April the 14th.
Ball by John Wall seemed harmless enough, but Villa's Ken McNaught hesitated for an eternity and allowed Mariner to find Brazil for the opening goal. Thus led to Ipswich's second goal, scored beautifully by Eric Gates.
But of course, this sport's not as simple as all that. Ipswich was supposed to be knackered, especially after they bowed out of the FA Cup after extra time a few days prior. They were supposed to be blinded by the possibility of UEFA Cup success. Neither happened, and the ball was now in Ipswich's court. They were the ones who had a game in hand and just a points deficit. Then, Easter showed up.
24 games. He's got that one all right. It's Morley attacking Anderson. I'm looking for William. Yes!
Villa had got 3 points from the festivities thanks to a draw at Stoke, and after defeats to both Arsenal and Norwich, Ipswich had 0. 3 more points would do it. As Villa waited with bated breath for the visit of Middlesbrough 5 days later, as Tony Morley slept in a hostel because his house had just burned down, and as Ipswich celebrated reaching a UEFA Cup final, the title was going right down to the wire, and Villa were now favourites.
Evans gets up, there's With. Here's Evans, Shaw! Gary Shaw! On by Sunderland. John Hollins and McDermott's in there, Young. Willie Young! He's delayed it though. Jankovic. Oh, that's 2-0. Big Bosco's done it again.
Bosko Jankovic, the forgotten hero of Aston Villa, the one who scored the winning goal at Ayresome Park for Middlesbrough that confirmed the championship for Villa. It's become famous now that 14 players were used to win the title, and of those, half were ever present, from Rimmer, Swain, McNaught and Mortimer to Bremner, Cowans and Morley. Gary Shaw missed just 2 games, Alan Evans 3 and Peter With 6. Shaw was voted the Young Player of the Year. Meanwhile, it should be said, Tony Barton's influence and player identification was all over this team. Of the 7 that were ever present in the championship winning year, 5 were signings that he had recommended. Maybe he worked under the radar at Villa Park, but he'd be a lot more obvious come the end of the following season.
Slack marking again, which cost Villa the second goal. Ritchie is in at the near post, flicks on, and Gary Rowell stays at home at the far post. 2-1 to Sunderland.
It was simple to see after these first two games, at home to Notts County and away to Sunderland, just why Villa were priced at 8-1 to retain their title. Those odds seemed laughably short when 6 draws were racked up in succession as September became October. Ron Saunders would win just 5 more league matches as Aston Villa manager after that particular run. With the prospect of another league championship over almost as quickly as it begun, Aston Villa welcomed the European Cup with open arms for the very first time.
The game was a volley, swift, precise, and worthy of a bigger audience than a mere 3,500.
For Turlecki, beautiful goal!
The thing that had been playing on Villa's players' minds was whipped away from them for the winter as domestic matters took precedent again. By the time the club entered February, the League Cup was no longer an option thanks to West Brom, but there was far more important news before the 5th round of the FA Cup against Tottenham Hotspur on February 13th.
I was well aware that when this happened last week, they were taking security away from me, which I feel the manager's got to have, which I felt that I deserved, and I felt I owed them nothing.
Aston Villa might have been 17th, but that wasn't the reason for Ron Saunders' resignation. As usual at Villa Park, it was matters off the pitch that shaped those on it drastically. With the advent of 82, Saunders was informed that his rolling contract was no more. He would be given a fixed 3-year deal. That, combined with the frugal nature of Villa's transfer business, had caused the manager to have had just about enough of the club. The following day marked the start of the new era, one with Tony Barton in temporary charge, as Villa were held 1-1 by Southampton, before crashing out of the Cup at White Hart Lane 3 days beyond that. With the European Cup due to return in less than a month's time, Villa were in shambles, but at least they could count on some guaranteed joy.
Scott just got there in time, and Will has got it. Peter Will had broken the deadlock.
That was the release that everyone at Villa Park needed. Whilst they weren't pulling up trees with their football or about to march up the league by winning the remainder of their games, some life had been injected back into the club. The machine that Ron Saunders had built wouldn't go away overnight, and with Tony Barton's careful hands now guiding the players, Villa were able to continue as they were doing, and that started up once again with some European visitors.
Cowan finding Shaw. Good tackle, but it comes to Shaw again, and still Shaw. Oh, he's done so well here. And it's in! Floated in high towards McNaught, who got up.
Through to the semi-finals of the European Cup against Anderlecht, and with local bragging rights earned over West Brom, Tony Barton penned a 3-year contract. His first big test as official manager, reach the European Cup final.
Turned on by Shaw. Cowans again. Hawley! 1-0!
And Brendan, for the umpteenth time, makes the challenge that epitomises Villa's performance, that Aston Villa's triumph here in their first season in the European Cup. They're through to the final, and Tony Barton has the opportunity.
Villa would grace the European Cup final, and Tony Barton had even won Manager of the Month for April. The Villa were back, and at the perfect time. Now they had 35 long-ass days to prepare for Rotterdam and an almighty test in the final, Bayern Munich. This wasn't the vintage of Beckenbauer, Meyer and Muller that ran roughshod over the 70s show, but it was still filled with household names. Klaus Augenthaler at the back, Paul Breitner the skipper in midfield, and Karl-Heinz Rummenigge up front. Rotterdam was ready.
So away we go in the European Cup final for Tony Morley. Oh, he missed it! And it is! Peter Will! Villa in the lead!
And with one shinned effort from Peter Wiv, Aston Villa were changed forever. As for Ron Saunders, he would pay the price forever for swapping Villa for the Blues. He left a club destined for the European Cup to one that were hurtling towards the second division at pace. Even though he relegated them and brought them back up, he left the club, again on course for relegation, for another West Midlands powerhouse, this time West Brom, who he also helped relegate within 5 months. It was a managerial run that would give credence to the conspiracy theories that he was simply doing a destroy and exit on Villa's closest rivals. While it's hard to believe that story, it remains perhaps one of the starkest cautionary tales in football management history. It would take a while for Villa fans to forgive Saunders for jumping across town. All could realise his accomplishment in taking what had been yesterday's team apparently to European glory. It was only with the passing of time and the cycling through managers such as Barton himself, Shrewsbury's Graham Turner and Billy McNeill that Saunders' achievements at Villa Park became more and more obvious. Doug Ellis had typically returned to power and had done nothing about the club's imminent slide back into the second division under McNeill, just 4 years after they had last played in the European Cup. Yes, they had ended their defence of the big-eared trophy comprehensively with defeat against Juventus, but had reaffirmed their quality with a Super Cup win over Barcelona in 1983. For what happens next, you'll just have to stick around. Until tomorrow. Fan of football from the 70s and 80s? Well, we've got these playlists in the meantime of pure footballing nostalgia.